Hi, it's another Friday, and that means another podcast, the Zogby Report, Real and Unscripted, subtitled The United State of Our Democracy, with a question mark, with a good reason for that question mark. As always, I'm John, and I'm here with my son, Jeremy, and I always follow that by asking, how are you doing today?
You know, I'm doing well. I'm in the studio. I was doing as you know, I was guest hosting a radio show not too far by and didn't feel like going all the way across town. So I'm here and we have a little bit different of a setup, but you look good and you sound good.
Thank you. And I'm home, and for no other reason than I didn't want to go down to the studio. And so might as well, we are totally transparent, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm very comfortable sitting here. Okay, I mean, there's so much going on, and we, do not want to be repetitive, but so there's hot news just actually within a half hour ago, the news we were waiting for. What was GDP growth or non-growth during the last quarter? And technically, by definition, 2 quarters in a row of non-growth is defined as a recession. And that's what happened. We had the second quarter in a row. Annualized, the GDP fell 0.9%. So not a lot. You do have the administration and some leading Democrats saying, well, let's not jump the gun here because there are mitigating factors. And even though there was slow growth, it wasn't as slow as anticipated. And you can't rightfully call this a recession. So I've got some comments, but let me ask the question first. Is a recession a recession a recession? Or are there mitigating factors here? Are we in a recession?
Well, I think we're in a recession that's being papered over. And to be honest with you, I think we've been by and large in that situation since 2008, 2009, where the structural issues haven't been dealt with. And so what do I mean by that? Of course, this is all going to depend on your stance on economics, like anything else, politics or religion. But, where did the '08 crisis come from? Well, there was a bubble preceding the '08 crisis. What created the bubble? More classical minded economics would say that the bubble was created by forcibly lowering interest rates, which propped up an artificial boom. And an artificial boom will always lead to a bust. And that bust was supposed to happen in 2008. But the powers that be, the politicians, the Goldman Sachses, the central bank, the Federal Reserve more specifically, didn't want it to happen on their watch. And so they came up with different tools like quantitative easing and other things to grease the wheels of the economy, to kick the can down the road, because they didn't want to face the day of reckoning. Because let's be honest, maybe a lot of us in their shoes would do the same. Who wants to face the day of reckoning? Who wants to go down in history as that administration that had, a great recession, or probably more likely a full-fledged depression? And so they kicked the can down the road. But the fact of the matter is, and we've been in that. We went through quantitative easing 1, 2, 3, and 4. So Jerome Powell is, of course, now trying to raise interest rates, something, that's long overdue. But this begs a question. And look, I'm going to tie this all together. Mm-hmm. I think the key question is, I think we could agree that being in control of the interest rate, which the Federal Reserve is in control of, they determine the interest rate, and the big banks basically follow, the banks below that follow suit. That's an awesome, godly amount of power. And when you have that kind of power, there's going to be a lure to that power to do things like, lower the interest rates, to create bubbles, to promise programs that eventually we're going to have to pay for, but in the moment seem free. And so we're at this point now where Powell is trying to normalize interest rates But, really the key question is, should a Federal Reserve, should a central bank even have that power? Because we keep getting into these boom bust cycles. And no, these are not random things. These are caused by forcibly lowering interest rates. And so back to your question, are we in a recession? We're in a paper over recession, trying to, I believe, kick the can down the road and avoid what eventually has to happen as a maybe like a kind of type depression. And I mean, I'm just going to use the analogy, when there's an addiction to something, to a chemical substance, the person eventually has to do something like go cold turkey, or they have to go to a clinic and get help. And there's just no way to do it pain-free. And this nation has become addicted to debt. We're a consumer economy, 70% consumer economy, addicted to debt. And the only way to get onto the road to health and to get better is we're going to have to go through those hard times. But what I see are a lot of politicians and people at the Federal Reserve who just don't want to face that day of reckoning. And I don't think it's avoidable.
Well, since we've had this discussion many, many times before, no surprise that I'm going to just say flat out, I really totally disagree on this one. We have a market economy, and though folks like Adam Smith and David Ricardo wanted to discuss and lay out the ultimate beneficence of a market economy, freedom, let the interests put their interests on the table and let it all work out. And when it didn't work out, an invisible hand would come down and smooth things out. Fact of the matter is, it doesn't work that way. And booms and busts have been a part of the market economy since day one. They're cyclical. We've always had them. We can be blasé and say, well, as Jesus said, the poor will always be among us. We will always have economic slowdowns and recessions, depressions, and the like. The fact of the matter is that when you have government and when you have political power, you have responsibilities. On one hand, either compassionate responsibilities, or on the other hand, responsibilities to ensure that there's not rioting in the streets and there aren't bread lines and wheat riots and so on. And so government has had to act. And since the Industrial Revolution, each one of the slowdowns, major depressions, we're getting worse and worse and worse and worse till the big bust, global bust actually, of the 1930s. We're not going to replay and relive all of those. But fact of the matter is, whether we have economic booms today or not, we still have a lot of people who are getting hurt. And somebody has to do something. And where I disagree with you in particular is, and we've talked about this, so I mean, this is no surprise.
Yeah.
And we've always talked about it calmly with each other, is the people getting hurt part of it. We can't just say, oh, collateral damage. Oh, well, things will get better and folks will be hiring. And that then leads to the final point that I want to make now, which is, so we've had 2 quarters of economic slowdown, but we also have 3.6% unemployment. I mean, these are the figures that we've always gone with, so it is 3.6%. We have signs out, help wanted, hiring, please apply, that sort of thing. So some things are going well. And yet on the other hand, I'm on my 5th hand now, I guess, is that you have folks that are being seriously hurt, and consumer confidence, that report just came out yesterday, that would be Thursday, that is very low. People are in a horrid funk right now. A recession, and at the same time high inflation. It's mind-boggling, but somebody's got to do something. Now, what would you suggest that we undo and then do nothing? And I don't mean that in a snide way. I really want to discuss this. What does one do if one has the authority?
Well, look, you and I agree on that people are suffering and that we don't want people to suffer. And just by way as an anecdote, because I just talked about this on the radio, we had a pastor on the radio who does work for homeless. And I talked about exactly what you said about Jesus, the poor will always be among us. And looking at it in context, some hardliners like a Pat Robinson, if I'm even saying his name right, or
Pat Robertson.
Pat Robertson would say, well, yeah, I mean, Jesus was saying there's always the poor, what are we going to do about it? But actually, the reality is that a woman had brought an anointment or some kind of balm, healing balm, and dumped it on him in a very customary way of admiration of Jesus. And Jesus was saying, there are people who are struggling out there. I don't need it. They need it, for there will always be the poor. In other words, be charitable. And you and I agree that people should be charitable. And you and I agree that human suffering is awful. But where we disagree is you think that the Federal Reserve's actions and some of the power players have the best interest of the people. The reality is that they have the best interest of themselves. And how do I know that? Because they're always getting richer. The Hamptons is never getting poorer. The Beltway is never getting poorer. They are always getting richer. They are always getting more money. Meanwhile, Main Street is getting poorer. Why is that? What is the cause of that? It is the very policies that create these boom bust cycles that kill the middle class. So you say the government's got to do something, but oftentimes when the government acts, the government acts in its best interest. And oftentimes the government is completely out of touch with reality about what needs to be done. So to the question of what needs to be done, there is so much responsibility and wealth and resources and capital centralized in the government's hands that has built up a massive class of bureaucrats that has siphoned the wealth away from Main Street. What they simply need to do is allow themselves to go bankrupt, to free up those resources to go back to the people, because they're pulling the resources in kind of like a parasite. And if Goldman Sachs had gone bankrupt, and if the Federal Reserve, had some punishment for their role in this, people would have learned their lesson, and we would learn our mistakes. But don't think that, okay, yeah, it wouldn't. And like I said, this won't be pain-free. There's no way we can escape pain. There's no way you can escape any addiction, whether it's drugs or an addiction to debt, without some kind of reckoning. That's just an unfortunate reality of a natural reality. But I think that the key thing is, don't continue to centralize the responsibility within the very entity, within the hands of the entity who created the problem, because as I keep saying, they get richer. They're the ones who are getting richer.
Let me just stop for 1 second, because understand that centralization of economic power was long before any government intervention whatsoever. Now, the fact that government intervention has not, mitigated that centralization of economic power, is particularly troublesome. What it has done on numerous occasions, particularly since the New Deal, is it's reshuffled some of that wealth and expanded, whether it be through currency or direct handouts of some or entitlements of some sort. It's at least put some spending power in the hands of poor and middle class folks. Certainly not enough, never sufficient. But the bottom line is the tendency towards centralization. My early economics professor at Lemoyne Capitalism is the desire to acquire, but it becomes the urge to merge. And that urge to merge was really the culprit, was really the cause for monopolization, for bad actors like the railroad guys, like J.P. Morgan, and somebody had to do something back then. Somebody has to do something today as well.
Well, the thing is, well, I would say that centralization of power hasn't, to the extent that we have today, I don't believe has always been with us. The debate has always been with us. Hamilton versus Jefferson. Jefferson,
Yep.
There was an exchange between the two where Hamilton said to Thomas Jefferson, if only men were angels, then we could be self-governed. To which Jefferson said, if only bureaucrats and government officials were angels, right? Because Hamilton was for the national bank. And I've come to be critical of Hamilton, that Hamilton's interest in a national bank really benefited the mercantile and banking and industrial class, because a national bank creates inflation, the engine of inflation. And who are the ones who benefit from that first? Those buddy systems, that club that, what's his name, George Carlin talked about. It's a club and you and I ain't in it. And that's exactly what it was on One Wall Street, which was the Bank of New York, which was Hamilton's bank that he founded, which acted in concert with the National Bank, that this was something that benefited the mercantile class. And as the money is created through inflation, it circulates, filters down to us little people, and becomes worth less. That's why you've seen over the course of this country's history a usurpation from Main Street to K Street, where Main Streets were booming. Main Streets were great. And then all of a sudden, the K Street lobbies grew. And by the way, who lobbied for the Federal Reserve other than John D. Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan? Why? Because they benefited from it.
Absolutely. No question about that. And that's another topic for another time. So, all right, let's move on.
Sure.
Charlie Cook, the great Congress watcher, just this week, his Cook report said that instead of projecting Republicans to win 35 to 40 seats in November, he's downgraded that now to 15 to 20 seats. What's your hunch? Crystal ball? Yeah, no crystal ball. Let's just talk hunches right now. Come November, Chris, we got a long way to go. But and you do have to a large degree get into individual districts, which we're not going to do. But is it your hunch that the Republican advantage going into November is not as great as it was once thought to be?
I think so. There's an argument for it and an argument for it's both. Okay. I know that sounds contradictory or ridiculous, but I think those two dynamics are at play. I personally feel that there may very well be a Trump fatigue. That this is an old show. Is Trump like, Rocky, where he can have 6 movies, or like better yet, some of those horror movies when I was growing up, Michael Myers or Freddy Krueger, where there were 9, sequels of those movies. I think it's different in politics. A movie.
Don't forget.
And Chuck, that's right. Yeah, they had a lot of those. That one never really, that one made an impression on you.
Yes, sure did. Yeah.
Politicians are different than movies. Yes, there are some who can maintain for a while, but I think when you're talking, well, obviously with the presidency, you have a limit. But I almost feel like there's some Trump fatigue, and so there's that. But I don't think the Democratic ground game is in their favor. I think right now the Republicans have more issues under their belt that they can rev their base up over, as well as the independents. And right now, really, The Democrats only have abortion and maybe gun violence. But the fact of the matter is gun violence works against them because crime is on the rise. And so if you start clamping down on gun ownership, you're only going to see more crime. And that's just a fact. I mean, look, there was the story a week ago I think it was in Indiana. There was a mall shooting or about to be a mall shooting. And what saved that from being a mass shooting was a 22-year-old who was carrying, who was the hero. And so for every gun violence mass shooting that there are often stories we never hear about that there are onlookers who save the day. And so that's my point, is that the gun violence thing for the Democrats is not in their tool bag because it can work against them with crime on the rise. So in short, I think there's Trump fatigue, but I think the Republicans have more issues that they can rev up their base and maybe just enough independents.
Here's how I see it from the vantage point of late July right now. And of course, we get to revisit this over and over again. But this may be a pivotal week. Whether one agrees or disagrees, there are some possible congressional actions that are about to take place on climate, on the deficit, on boosting American manufacturing, particularly chip manufacturing, and perhaps more to come, which will give an image, at the very least, of something happening, something being done. At the same time, not to be Pollyannish about this, but the price of gas at the pump has gone down, and we're going to have to see if it's going to go down a little bit more. That could be pivotal. The downward trend in prices could be, an important factor. But above all, in order to beat an incumbent party, it's not going to be enough to not be that incumbent party. Republicans are going to have to come up with solutions. And I'm not sure that they have credible ones yet. They have advantages structurally. They have advantages in controlling state legislatures. And they have history in terms of generally bad news for a one-term president in his first off-year election. But I think it's going to be a horse race. And I'll tell you, there's some polling out today. Rasmussen has the president at 45%. Internally, we have the president at 45% as well. Going to have to watch other polls and see if that's an upward trend or not, and if that continues because of new legislation. But if that's the case, we might be seeing a bit of a rebound here. Yeah. And I don't know. But at least for now, I think it's worth putting on the table.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are naturally rebounds, right? I mean, I find that with anything in the so-called big leagues, right? You're going to have the horses pull ahead, the horses fall behind, the pull ahead. I wouldn't say it's game over right now, but the fact of the matter is, our poll that we or at least we haven't really released any elements of it, but of the top two issues that I asked, inflation, no surprise, came up. 48% said was the top issue, and it was 20 points higher than the number two issue, which was abortion rights. I'm sorry, it was 44% chose inflation, 24% chose abortion rights, and then the third one was immigration and the border, 21%. And so the rest of them fall below 20s, climate change and other things. So that I think inflation works against Biden because the perception is Biden has created inflation. And I think by and large, well, listen, every president has created inflation. Trump certainly did, but Biden has really created, or it's happened under his watch. So that's working against them. But you're saying, what are the Republican solutions? All they got to do is just remind voters about gas prices. Yeah, they did fall about 10 or 15 cents. But you're right. We'll see. I mean, will it go back down to 4, 350, 325? Probably not, especially with the way policies are. Of course, Joe Biden could reverse that, very easily. But I don't think that the Democrats are flexible enough to allow them for it. And that's a major problem, is that they have pigeonholed themselves so much into the climate justice warrior mentality that even with gas going to $5, $6, $7, they wouldn't even entertain energy independence, and that could very well sow the seeds of their destruction.
They're in a bind on releasing some or a chunk of the reserves because of that climate change argument. But remember, climate change is a high priority. Our polls showed that. It came in 4th or 5th place and respectably high. And that is an issue that can energize younger voters who right now are disillusioned by Biden. So they have to be very careful. I think we better sign off so you get the last word.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I would just ask about the young voters. What keeps them up more at night? Is it more CO2 or is it more finding their first job? I don't know. We'll see. The only other observation I have is I love this conversation, by the way, but I tend to notice that when we're on the screen, the dynamic is a little different. I love the dynamic when we're in person. So let's make sure well, that's going to be difficult when I'm traveling overseas the next couple of weeks. So
yeah, I'm not
teleport.
I'm not going. Okay. Have a good week, everybody. You have a good week.
You too. Take care.